Okay, we can get started now. I'll continue to let people in as the meeting goes forward, as the presentation goes forward. And just so you know, everyone, that this session is being recorded again. Okay, so welcome everyone to tonight's presentation, De-stigmatizing homelessness and mental health. Our presenters are Tina White and Molly Bartholomew from Connections for the Homeless. Okay, I'm gonna let them further introduce themselves. I'm Irene Williams. I'm the Health and Wellness Librarian here at the Evanston Public Library, and we want to welcome everyone to this evening's presentation.
Hi, we're really happy to be here. We're going to be talking about homelessness and mental health. I am Tina White. I'm Director of Community Programs at Connections for the Homeless. Molly, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Molly Bartholomew, and I'm a behavioral health specialist at Connections for the Homeless.
Before we dive into the presentation, put in the chat or just take yourself off mute and let us know if there's anything in particular you want us to cover or questions you have about homelessness and mental health. And as we go through our presentation, we want it to be as interactive as possible. So raise your hand, put something in the chat, or just take yourself off of mute and make whatever comment or question you have. So with that said, I think we're going to dive into our presentation. Let me get share my screen. Second. Okay. Can you let me start the presentation. Can you see it okay?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. We're going to go over just some sort of background, just some statistics and mental health and homelessness. First, to just get started. So this is kind of interactive. So if you could put in the chat or just give a guess on any given night, how many people do you think are experiencing homelessness in the country? Just ballpark estimate. What do you think? And Molly, can you monitor the chat?
Yeah, sure. All right, somebody said 1 million.
Okay. Any other guesses, thoughts, ideas? 10K. So we have 1 million. You think it's 1 million, 100,000? Something else?
Someone else says, Mark says 500,000.
Okay. So good guess, Mark. 580,000. So just over, a little bit over 500,000 people on a single night. And this is nationwide, people across the US who are experiencing homelessness. What do you think about Illinois? Someone said 10K, or someone said 100,000. How many people do you think, ballpark, are homeless in Illinois?
All right, Dan is guessing 10,000.
Good job. 10,119. Very good guess. I wish we could, if we were in person, we would give out prizes for this, but we're not. So yeah, so in 2020, 10,119 people across the state of Illinois were experiencing homelessness. So we're in North Suburban Cook County. So from all the way up to Lake County, from the border of Chicago all the way up to Lake County. What do you, how many, what do you think about this one? Any thoughts? Nine.
9,000. Okay. This is, yes, Chicago has much higher numbers, so this is just outside of the city limits.
Thank you. Yeah. So this would be not include Chicago. So, so this is just, yeah, not including Chicago, would be much higher. So in North Suburban Cook County, 846 in the last point in time count in 2020. That is a night each year when we are homeless service providers go out and they actually hand count people that they encounter in the street and in other unsheltered environments and in shelters. What about Evanston? So what do you think about, how many people do you think are experiencing homelessness in Evanston?
Uh, 100 is a guess.
Any other thoughts? More or less than that? What do you think? $197 people. That is our best estimate based on, and this includes people who are living in an unsheltered or staying in an unsheltered environment, so street, parking garage, someplace like that, and people in either Interfaith Action's overnight shelter or the Margarita or Family Promise. So this includes sheltered and unsheltered. So does that seem, I'm curious, does that seem more? Does anyone have any thoughts on those numbers? Does that seem more than you had expected or fewer than you had expected?
I know Allie was thinking that she was estimating 300 children in District 65 alone.
So yes, so that we're Allie, this is a count of not necessarily including doubled up, like families who are unstably housed and don't have secure housing. It is more people who are sheltered, so in a including Family Promise, but in one of Evanston's shelters, Interfaith Action, Margarita, or Family Promise, and in the streets. So that is our best guess, but if we add unstably housed or insecure housed, then it definitely is a lot higher.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, Dan was wondering if the Evanston count was done in the winter.
This was done more, this was actually not, this number is not the point in time count. This is the point in time count is done in the winter. This one was the Homeless Services Task Force put together this estimate based on our knowledge of who is at shelters on our wait list and being engaged in unsheltered environments by our outreach team. So here's some additional statistics. We talked about how many people across the US were experiencing homelessness. So gender by the sheltered and unsheltered, so that sheltered is, in a congregate or some type of emergency shelter. Unsheltered is living in any sort of unsheltered environment. So about 61% were sheltered and 39% unsheltered. And here's the gender breakdown. So about 60% identified as male, about 39% as female, and about 1% as transgender or gender non-conforming. There are definitely racial disparities in homelessness. So 39% of individuals, this is nationwide, identify as Black, sorry, 39% of people identifying as Black are homeless, but only 12% of the overall population. So big disparity there. Families, so about 29.6% were families with children, and 53% of families experiencing homelessness nationwide identify as Black. Veterans, about 8% of homeless adults, and youth, so transition age youth or unaccompanied minors, so under age 25, is about 6%, or 34,000 people nationwide. That's just the Illinois, the statistics by state. You can see California has 161,000, by far has the largest population of people experiencing homelessness. Here's some additional, this was in our North Suburban Cook County point in time count in 2020. So this is more local. This is our region, North Suburban Cook County. We talked about 846 people were experiencing homelessness in suburban Cook County. 79% were sheltered. 14% were unsheltered. The gender breakdown was similar. So about 59% male identified, about 40.5% were women identified as women, and 1% as transgender. So that's pretty similar to the national statistics. Again, families, so a big, so 34.5% of households, 292 individuals. And in Evanston, there are approximately 197 households experiencing homelessness. But I want to talk, we want to talk a little bit more about the intersection of homelessness and mental health. So there's a pretty large portion of people experiencing homelessness do also have a mental health and or substance abuse problem. So issue. 46% of them have one or the other. So about 26% have a severe mental illness, 35% have a chronic substance abuse problem, and 46% have either both, or one or the other, or both. So about just under half have a behavioral health diagnosis. So it's a pretty large portion of the homeless population. We're going to talk a little bit about structural issues impacting homelessness, and mental health support, because we don't have enough services, we don't have enough housing. So what are some of the structural issues that have contributed to this? One is a large-scale closing of state psychiatric hospitals in the 60s and 70s. Budget cuts and limited outpatient mental health services. Lack of coordination when people are released from jails and prisons. Cook County Jail is known as one of the largest mental health providers in the nation, which is an interesting statistic. So when people leave, jail, often there's not a whole lot of, very little coordination. They sometimes can even leave in the middle of the night with very few resources. So they can often, if they don't have support, they might end up experiencing homelessness when they're discharged from jail or prison. So that lack of coordination is a problem. Aging out of the welfare system. We have someone here, Allie, I know you're on here. I know this is a big issue for youth. Do you have anything you want to say about that? I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I would say, sorry, I was driving now and stopped.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I mean, just lack of affordable housing, and this lack of coordination between agencies for sure is a thing. But for our families in District 65, it's just being priced out of town or being priced out of the apartment that they're in. And definitely has been increased because of the pandemic. So that's a big thing. Yeah.
Would you
And
say
that's
that
stressful.
families, would you say that they are like in a shelter, like unsheltered or sheltered, or more like doubled up and insecurely housed or unstably housed?
A lot more doubled up or unstably housed, like about to get evicted or foreclosed on, or looking for housing. There's a few that have inadequate shelter, like they can be living, you can qualify as homeless in our school system if you're in inadequate housing, lacking heat, lacking water, that kind of thing. There's some of those. And then refugees and, immigrants qualify as well.
So the numbers I went over did not include, if we include doubled up or unstably housed, which is the case for many of the families Ali was talking about, that the numbers would skyrocket. So the numbers I mentioned were just people in shelters and living in the streets. So aging out of the welfare system is not, so after you're 21 in Illinois, there's not can suddenly not be eligible for a lot of support that you were before. So that's a kind of key contributor. Insufficient, affordable, or subsidized housing. That is a huge issue here in Evanston. We don't have enough shelter beds. So on our wait list, we have about 100 people on our wait list at any given time. I know Interface Shelter it's a 20-bed cold weather shelter. They have always have people on their wait list as well. And then insufficient permanent supportive housing for those that need it. So there's just not enough housing options for people, especially for people who with chronic medical and behavioral health conditions that need ongoing subsidized housing and support to stay housed. So the role of, we're going to talk a little bit about the SMRFs is the acronym. So specialized mental health rehabilitation facilities, they used to be called IMDs, institutions for mental disease, which is not very strengths-based term at all. So they're now known as SMRFs. They're facilities that are federally designated as institutions designed to promote treatment and recovery for individuals with severe mental illness. The conditions are not always ideal. So they're, in Evanston, Albany Care, and Greenwood Care are the only state licensed SMRFs. I want to talk a little bit about the Williams and Colbert consent decrees as well. The state of Illinois was sued in 2010 and 2011 for keeping people in nursing homes and IMDs that were able to live in the community. So there's now a number, thousands of class members that reside in the community that are part of the Williams consent decree and Colbert consent decree. So this is part of the deinstitutionalization that has happened, which in this case, this is a good thing. It's a less restrictive environment, but it does leave fewer mental health resources for other people that need them. So like an ACT team is an assertive community treatment team. They provide a very high level of community support. Many people who are chronically homeless need very intensive support. So because of the consent decrees, a lot of those teams are working with people in these consent decrees, and not always. So there's really not enough of the high level services that are needed for everybody who needs it. So I'm going to stop there. We're going to move into best practices for people experiencing homelessness and behavioral health issues. Before I do that, are there any questions on anything that we touched on so far? Okay. I think we're going to talk about. Okay, first we're going to talk about mental health court. Has anybody ever heard this term mental health court? And if so, do you know what it? Well, you know what it is because I just it's on the screen. But have you heard of mental health court? Any thumbs up?
I've never heard of it.
It's a specialized program to divert people with mental health issues away from the criminal justice system. So someone might have be charged with something in the community, and instead of being sent to jail, they are diverted away from the criminal justice system into community-based treatment programs that are court mandated. So a lot of people in jail they have a very, especially Cook County Jail is the largest mental health provider in the country, if you can call it that, but it does provide basic medication, and they do a basic mental health screening when people enter the jail. And so there's an enormous number of people involved in the criminal justice system who have a behavioral health or mental health issue. So instead of sentencing them to serve time in a correctional facility, they are diverted. It requires a lot of collaboration from the criminal justice system and mental health field. So judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, social workers, victim advocates all work together to try to help someone get the support that they need and avoid getting involved in the criminal justice system. So if they comply with the court mandated community-based treatment programs, then they are diverted away from jail. It's mostly used with nonviolent offenders who've been diagnosed with a behavioral health or mental health condition. And studies have found really positive outcomes, including lower reoffense rates, fewer days of incarceration, fewer psychiatric hospitalizations, and fewer emergency department visits. So that's a best practice, because we kind of went through the first part was kind of like, what's going on? What are the structural barriers, and why do we not have enough, housing and support for people with serious mental illness who are experiencing homelessness? So these are kind of like best practices that are working and are effective. We're going to watch a video and then talk. It's pretty brief. And then talk a little bit about another best practice, housing first and low barrier housing and shelter.
It's my closet. I've got all my clothes, they're all clean.
Ralph Manning is home. After living on the streets of Los Angeles for nearly 2 years, he finally received subsidized housing. And with it, a new lease on life.
I can't even tell you how happy I am about having a place to call my own, to go home to every day. It's quiet, and I haven't been in that situation in years. It's funny because I don't have much, and I've lost, I can't even tell you, a lot of the important things that you keep from growing up, or, sorry.
Ralph has little from his past, other than difficult memories of a father who had substance use disorder, an issue Ralph also lives with now. along with severe depression. For most of his life, Ralph received no help for either condition, and he's not alone. Fewer than 13% of people with dual diagnoses receive treatment, which significantly increases their risk of experiencing homelessness. And without housing, their symptoms greatly intensify.
I had no prospect of anything, any kind of job, any kind of relationships. And I actually attempted to commit suicide through overdosing intentionally. And I just couldn't bear the thought of another day of sleeping on the street and being on guard all the time.
It was a story we heard over and over. People with dual diagnoses whose conditions worsened when they lost housing.
This is my car, my front room. This is my bedroom. Sleep was hard to come by when I first became homeless. So, I drank every night, which helped me sleep. I could feel the depression starting to creep in. Once it gets there, it's hell to get out of it.
I felt like a piece of trash that's being thrown away and kicked out of hospitals. When you're homeless and you don't have anywhere to live and you're mentally ill, it's hard to find proper treatment.
There's a lot of resources out there, but you have to be willing to work within whatever the parameters those resources set. The problem I see is that when you really need it, you're probably least willing to be able to work with those guidelines or rules.
The complexity of living with dual diagnoses increases a person's risk that one episode of homelessness will lead to chronic homelessness. But experts say there is hope. In treatment facilities equipped to address mental illness, substance use, and homelessness simultaneously.
There was an older model that said to people who are homeless, you need to get well first and then we'll help connect you to housing. You need to be sober first, or you need to have made it to a certain number of therapist visits in a row without missing one before we'll help you with housing. Wellness begins with a home. For someone who lives outdoors, it's extremely difficult to make appointment time without losing your belongings. There's a whole host of physical health problems that exacerbate mental illness. To take good care of our health in any domain, we need a stable foundation, a place to sleep at night, a door that we can lock, a sense of security.
It's why some treatment centers now employ personnel whose sole focus is helping unhoused clients secure a home. The ultimate goal, get them settled and into treatment.
The breakthrough for me was when I got housing. This is the longest that I have been stable, for 8 years to hold on to housing, which encouraged me to continue treatment at mental health, to receive the proper attention that I needed, and to take my medications.
I'm housed now through the help of a gentleman who I met at Tarzana Treatment Center. He's a housing navigator who was working through them.
Still, housing navigation is not universally available, and even if it were, there's a housing shortage.
I have a counselor who's a coordinated entry system worker. He goes, don't expect an answer for at least a year. And this is my little slot. And I'm home for the night. Mentally, it starts really grating on you because it's like, when's this going to end? When is this going to end?
For Ralph, homelessness has ended. And he says he feels lucky. He can now focus on treatment and think about his future for the first time in many years.
Having a place to live has taken away a big part of why I feel like I use. With stable housing, it's just that whole part of the equation is taken care of where that is good. I want to go to school, I want to establish relationships with my family again. You can't do that if you're homeless. So can't tell you how grateful I am.
So wellness begins with the home. Housing is healthcare. Imagine, trying to deal with a behavioral health issue or medical issue as well, and being homeless. It's the foundation for any sort of recovery. So that stuck out for me in the video as wellness begins with the home. Thoughts on that video? We're going to talk briefly about some stories of people we've worked with and how housing was able to help them stabilize. Molly, you're going to talk about harm reduction.
Yes, so I'm just going to start with a basic definition of harm reduction. Harm reduction is trying to it aims to reduce negative consequences of substance use and respects individual self-determination. I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo. I think one of the myths about harm reduction is that that you're not promoting abstinence, and actually abstinence can be part of a harm reduction. But the goal of harm reduction is really to meet people where they're at without judgment and to offer different treatment options. And evidence shows that harm reduction interventions are cost effective, produce positive health outcomes, and in some cases lead to reductions in drug-related criminal activity. And I was just wondering if anyone has any examples of harm reduction.
So we all use harm reduction every day in different ways. It doesn't just relate to substance use, but relates to just, reducing harm around anything. Does anyone have any personal? Oh, someone asked what dual means. Sorry, we missed that, Dan. Dual just means both a mental health and substance abuse. So dually diagnosed means they have both a mental health diagnosis and a substance abuse or dependence diagnosis. Sorry.
So some examples, one of the basic ones could be a seatbelt. That's something you encounter every day. Another thing is sometimes people who have issues with alcohol, maybe they have a DUI, they'll put a breathalyzer, or it's a breath alcohol ignition interlock device in the car, so that if they are drinking, they won't be able to drive. And another example might be a nicotine patch if you're trying to quit smoking. And then one that we encounter is a fentanyl test strip. So if someone is using a substance, they can test to make sure there's not fentanyl, and it can make their experience safer.
We at Connections, we have Narcan, which is reverses overdoses. It's in people. That's one harm reduction strategy in addition to the fentanyl strips, to help people who are not able or willing to quit, right? Or not able or not wanting to quit a particular substance. There's still ways to reduce harm. Change is hard. So if you have an addiction issue, change is a process. It's not something where you wake up and the next day you immediately implement that change, right? So when we try to make a change, we go through a process. We go through pre-contemplation and contemplation and action and maintenance. And so a lot of people are not in the action stage, or they may not, they may continue to use a particular substance, or they may switch to a different substance that's less harmful. So the focus is on helping them reduce negative consequences and harm, and focusing on problematic behaviors instead of use. So you might have someone who does use alcohol, actually, is a legal substance, can cause a lot of societal problems for some people. And focusing on behavior allows, some people use alcohol, don't have any adverse consequences. They use it safely, and it's not an issue for them. Other people, who have an addiction issue might use alcohol or another substance, and they might behave in a way that is problematic. And so we focus on the behavior and not the use. So that's kind of that, and reducing negative consequences, or it's kind of the key kind of tenets of harm reduction. Has anyone, are people familiar with this term harm reduction, or is this a new term? And what do you think about it? Dan talked about any rich kids who fight with their parents and end up homeless. Is that common? A lot of youth that end up homeless, a big chunk of them are LGBTQ, part of the LGBTQ community. So that, and they're, can be rejected by their family. I would say it's not common for rich kids to end up homeless, but if there's a breakdown of family, and they're certainly kids become homeless when they are asked for whatever reason to leave their home, and so it can happen. Anything else with harm reduction that you guys have questions about? There can be a lot of myths about it, like it enables substance use. Anything else? Well, you're going to talk about trauma-informed care.
Yes, so trauma-informed care assumes that an individual is more likely than not to have a history of trauma, particularly among people experiencing homelessness. And I think this is really important. I think most of the people that we work with have experienced trauma, and just living through homelessness, not having to worry about, being a victim of violence, it's often a very traumatic experience. And with trauma-informed care, we want to reframe the question of what is wrong with this person to what has happened to this person. So some examples, like for example, we've had a fire alarm go off at one of our facilities, and some people get very triggered by this. And rather than saying, what is wrong with them, we want to be curious, what has happened to them. Maybe they've survived a fire, or maybe there's something about the noise that was really upsetting to them. So we want to approach them in a compassionate way. And we also want to be really attentive to what environment we have, and make sure that it's promoting healing and recovery rather than providing services that may unintentionally re-traumatize clients and participants. So some examples of that might be when you're thinking about the physical environment, like monitoring who comes in and out of the building, and being mindful of noise levels, keeping noise level down, making sure bathrooms and entrances and parking lots are well lit. In terms of socio-emotional, respecting boundaries, being welcoming to people, and also in terms of the clinical aspect of trauma-informed care, make sure that you're doing a trauma screening only once. You don't want to re-traumatize people and ask them, to tell really difficult stories over and over again. Any questions about trauma-informed care?
Do you want to talk about this before I play it, Molly, or do you want me to play it first?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say that at our shelter and at the drop-in site, we had Open Studio Project is a partner, and they had trained art therapists who would come in once a week and lead an art group. It was an art process group. And where the site where I was working, we had about 14 different people, but usually there was a core group of maybe like 5 people who would come weekly. And the purpose was to focus on art as a process and not the end product, and art as a way to promote healing, to help increase well-being and learn new skills. Yeah, so it was a really popular group, and there's a little news clip that we're going to show about it.
A new Evanston exhibit features art by people who experience homelessness and their struggles during the pandemic. The exhibit is called Seeds of Change. It was organized by the Open Studio Project at Gallery 901. Everything on display was created by visitors at 2 Evanston homeless shelters, Hilda's Place and the Margarita Inn shelter. They created this art while learning how to cope with stress, providing them the perfect outlet to express themselves.
We wanted to provide a way for people to experience some wellness and also sort of process their own experiences, whether that's just memories or trauma or just the day-to-day effects of homelessness.
The exhibit is on display at Gallery 901 for the rest of the month.
So that's a really good example of services that are offered in that are trauma informed and help people heal and recover from past trauma. I'm going to talk a little bit about housing for people experiencing homelessness. This can be a little bit confusing. A lot of times people experiencing homelessness, certainly if they're in an unsheltered environment, they lose their documents. So it can be, they need a lot of support with becoming document ready to be eligible for housing and getting the assessments done, to apply for different types of housing. So some types of housing, emergency shelters, there's both congregate and non-congregate. So the Margarita Inn would be an example of a hotel-based non-congregate model. People have their own room. We can serve families there. It offers more privacy. A congregate-based shelter is often beds in the same room, and often you have to leave. You leave during the day, and then you're able to come back. And usually you don't have a reserved bed. You wait in line. Sometimes you do, but sometimes you. And there's in Chicago, several of the congregate shelters, you have to wait in line each night. I do think Interfaith, you have a reserved bed as long as you need it. But so that's the difference between congregate and non-congregate. Rapid rehousing is short-term rental assistance and case management for people that it can be anywhere from a few months to up to 2 years. The idea is that someone stabilizes enough to no longer need rental assistance, and they can take over the lease and pay the rent moving forward. So that's for people who are able to return to work and of course, the lack of affordable housing kind of complicates the equation a little bit, but that is not for the most vulnerable people with who would need likely permanent supportive housing. That's someone who need a supportive services to stay housed. They need a housing subsidy and ongoing case management, possibly for the rest of their lives. So this is someone who has a permanent, sometimes medical or behavioral health mental health disability. And they're not able to work often, and they need support with tenancy and daily living skills and things like that. There's not enough permanent supportive housing, so for the population that needs it. So we have a lot of people at the Margarita Inn waiting for permanent supportive housing. And there's just not enough. Every month through our whole region, we get about 10 matches. So openings for PSH, openings throughout all of suburban Cook County. And it's just it's not enough to meet the demand. And then affordable subsidized housing, that is just, you probably have heard of section, well, actually, sorry, I'm going to talk about Section 8 in a second. But affordable subsidized housing, it could be project-based or scattered site. And it's subsidized housing without supportive services. And Section 8 style mainstream vouchers is a type of scattered site subsidized housing without supportive services. Project-based is in a building. So that the voucher is tied to that building. So a lot of senior housing projects are project-based, and as long as you live in that building, then you receive this up. You're able to have subsidized or affordable housing. But when you leave the building, then you no longer would have it. And then scattered site or mainstream vouchers, those are often portable. So you find an apartment in the community, and you pay usually 30% of your income. And in many cases, you can port it. So you can, when you move that out of that apartment, you still have the voucher. So that's an important distinction between project-based and scattered site. Any questions about housing supports for people experiencing homelessness?
I have a question.
Yep.
How do they qualify? Like, how do you pick which ones to help?
Good question. So that we are part of the suburban continuum of care. That's the HUD funded. HUD gives a certain amount of money to what's called COCs in different regions. And so we're part of the Suburban Cook County Alliance to End Homelessness continuum of care. And they use this, they disperse, like they have something called a coordinated entry process that we complete with people. And we have to enter an initial assessment, but also we do something called a vulnerability assessment. It's called the VI-SPDAT is the tool. And it actually ranks people based on their vulnerability, and it prioritizes the most vulnerable for like permanent supportive housing. So we apply through we help people apply for permanent supportive housing through this continuum of care process. There's something called the statewide referral network, which is a subsidized housing in Illinois. And then there's just wait lists for different affordable housing options that kind of open up. And so it's fragmented, and that's why it's very complicated. People really need a lot of like system navigation and help to try to apply for these programs. So it's either through the continuum of care coordinated entry process for some housing, and for other housing, it's through like the Housing Authority of Cook County administers the Section 8 vouchers for our region. So people will be notified your name came up for a Section 8 voucher. So we basically, what happens is we kind of assess people on what type of housing do they need. Someone who's pretty stable, they can go back to work, they might just need a short-term housing voucher. A rapid rehousing voucher. Or if someone might even need just a couple of months of eviction prevention, they might just need, first month's rent paid and a security deposit. Or they might need, they have a permanent disability, they might need permanent supportive housing for the rest of their lives. So it runs the gamut based on what that person needs. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure. Molly, you're going to go over the case studies.
Yeah, so we just wanted to highlight a few people that we worked with in our shelter system who came to Connections for Services. So the first person I want to talk about, I'm going to call him James. 30-year-old African American male who he first showed up at drop-in in May of last year. And when I met him, he showed me hospital discharge paperwork. He came from inpatient psych. Um, and I was looking at his discharge plan, and we're like asking him, okay, did you follow up with your outpatient appointments? And he said, no, I wasn't able to make it. He said, he was sleeping on the trains, and his life was really unstable. So no, he was not able to make those outpatient appointments. He was also worried about taking his medication because it made him sleepy, it was sedating, and he really needed to be alert when he was on the train at night. And I noticed he was starting to become symptomatic again. He had a schizoaffective diagnosis. He was starting to have hallucinations again. And we were happy that he agreed to work with an outpatient mental health provider that we partner with called Trilogy. So he was able to get connected with them, and I referred him to the Margarita shelter waitlist. And after a few months, he was able to get into the shelter. And after that, he stabilized on his medication. He felt safe taking them because he wasn't sleeping on the train. He had a room to himself, and he was really active in the groups at Connections. He met with his Trilogy case manager regularly. Eventually, he actually got moved to the ACT team, assertive community treatment. So that's the highest level of outpatient mental health support. And he did really well on that team. And then he ended up getting matched to permanent supportive housing in a western suburb, and he's still doing well. He's connected with his mental health treatment team. So he's a really great outcome, and it really highlights how housing was really critical to him having a successful recovery and really gaining some stability in his life. And then we also wanted to highlight, this is someone, we'll call her Tanisha, a 45-year-old African-American female. And again, we first met her at drop-in, and she reported having a cognitive disability, traumatic brain injury and seizure disorder, and also some psychiatric diagnoses, including post-traumatic stress disorder and schizoaffective disorder. And she was choosing not to engage in mental health treatment. And she had some, but she was experiencing a lot of mental health symptoms. And initially she was matched to permanent supportive housing with a different agency, but due to her symptoms, she wasn't able to stay in her housing. She showed up again at drop-in, and then she was briefly at the Margarita, but it was just not a safe environment for her. It just wasn't a good match. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to stay at the shelter. And I think working with her just highlights, she really didn't have a lot of insight into her mental health diagnosis, and did not want to take medication, partially due to side effects. And unfortunately, we tried to support her the best we could. We did actually she was petitioned to go to the hospital, but and then she was discharged, but she did not want to take medication. So it's just, when someone doesn't have insight, it's just really difficult for them to have some stability in their life and really thrive in housing.
Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about briefly is just resources for mental health and homelessness in Evanston. So Trilogy Crisis Response Team, they are now live. They went live 24 hours a day. So that there's their number. If you encounter someone experiencing a mental health crisis in the community, they will do an assessment, complete a safety plan, and coordinate follow-up. We work really closely with them. Connections has a drop-in program. I can drop it in the chat, the outreach cards that have the information. But we have 2 drop-in programs to provide medical service, behavioral health and medical services, showers, case management, bag lunches, clothing closet, laundry, lockers, food pantry, computer and phone access. The one, Hilda's Place, is primarily for people currently experiencing homelessness, and the location at Dewey is for people with physical disabilities, because Hilda's Place is not accessible, or people who are already housed. There's a large food pantry at Dewey as well that people can utilize, and we have similar hours, 9 to 11 and 12 to 2, Monday through Friday, at those programs. Molly, I'm going to drop in the chat. Do you want to, while I do that, do you want to go over the additional resources? Oh, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Interfaith Action. This is community partner where people can go to St. Mark's Church, get some coffee and breakfast, get some help with employment, computer, and use computers and phones. The YWCA is specifically for people who are experiencing domestic violence. They've got a crisis line that's listed here. And then Family Promise Chicago North Shore. This is for families who, so it helps families stay together when they're experiencing homelessness, and also helps them with employment. And we have a question from Dan. Anyone's homeless now CEO success stories? That's a good question.
What was the question?
Anyone that we've worked with who was once homeless and now has achieved great things, their CEO or...
Well, that's it. We have worked with a woman who is now an attorney, and asked her, while she was working with this pastor LSAT, became an attorney, and she was experiencing homelessness with kids, and now she is thriving as an attorney. Any other questions? I hear a bad echo. Oh, there we go. Any other questions? We're almost out of time. Thoughts, questions? Okay, see a thumbs up.
I have a quick question. So do you know any resources for homelessness in Lake County by any chance?
I can look into it off the top. I mean, I'm familiar with a Safe Place as a domestic violence shelter that's in Zion, in Waukegan.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, sorry. PADS. The PADS is in Waukegan, and that's a church-based shelter that it rotates among different churches. I can send, I don't know if I don't think I have it handy, but I can send the library, Irene, information on it, if that would be helpful. I do know the executive director of the PAD shelter, so I can ask her. Are you in Lake County? Or are you wanting to refer someone in Lake County?
Yeah, I'm a therapist, and one of my clients is really struggling.
Okay. Irene, are you on still?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you be able to send something out?
I have every contact information, so yeah, I can send out whatever you give me.
Okay. It's a net, right? So we'll find that for you, the contact for shelter, and how to refer someone for emergency shelter in Lake County.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Anything else before we end tonight?
It's 8 o'clock. Thank you, everyone. Irene, can you stay on for a second?
Sure.
And Molly. Thanks, everybody. Nice
Thanks
to-
everyone for attending.
Have a great night. Thank you.